You're watching a video on the JBU House of Wind YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on the latest content. On her wedding night, this girl fought a wolf for 300 rounds, and in the end, even tried to force herself on it. It's a shame its fur was so thick, she couldn't find the right spot before the wolf woke up, staring at her resentfully, as if accusing her of her beastly behavior. But what else could she do? They got married solely to produce an heir, so for 3 days, she even specifically learned how to do that with a dog. Unfortunately, as she pushed open the door and stepped out of the room, the girl said helplessly to the butler, "There's a problem. Your Grand Duke isn't quite that right." Her name is Estina. At the age of 3, she awakened memories of her past life and learned she was once Queen Martina of the Carabella Empire. Over 100 years had passed, and everyone she knew was dead. After a brief period of confusion, she decided to cherish her present life. Unsurprisingly, from a young age, she was considered a genius, not only speaking earlier than others, but also devouring difficult history books. Learning etiquette alongside her older sister, who was 2 years her senior, she mastered perfect decorum in just 3 days. By the age of 12, she was even able to instruct the family's night guards. This continued until she and her sister were accepted into the Empire's top academy. However, disaster struck unexpectedly when her father's business failed, leaving the family in massive debt. While the family was in turmoil, the Grand Duke Atlanta's family offered their support on the condition that they marry their eldest daughter, Kana, to the Grand Duke. It should be known that the Atlanta family has a long and prestigious history, a place that a small family like theirs, despite all their wealth, could never reach. But the current head of the family was a monster covered in fur. No one knew why someone once praised as the stunningly handsome Grand Duke had become like that. Since when had he transformed into that state? Rumors of him tearing apart living people had spread far and wide, known to everyone. Marrying Kana to such a monster was no different from sending her to her death. Unable to bear the thought of her sister's demise, Estina secretly mounted her horse and left in the dead of night. She returned to the Count's mansion, and after understanding her parents' helplessness, she volunteered to marry the Grand Duke in Kana's place. Fearing her sister would chase after her, she immediately rode without rest to the Grand Duke Atlanta's mansion. Butler Oliver, seeing the girl arrive a day earlier than planned, found it strange. Why would someone be so eager to rush to their death? However, no one understood the master's condition better than he did. In the past 100 years, the Atlanta family had seen 15 successors. Only 5 had successfully inherited the title and died of natural causes. The rest had succumbed to a hereditary disease, losing their minds, and becoming monsters. Typically, the symptoms would appear when they reached the age of 20, cracked skin, fur growing all over their bodies, and a gradual loss of reason. Everyone thought the current master was safe, having grown to 25 without showing any signs of the illness. But a year ago, he began to lose all memory of the previous night's events, and his condition worsened from there. Now, to help the Atlanta family continue their lineage, the retainers had come up with the idea of taking advantage of a family with a weakness. Even a beast must procreate. It was better to risk everything than to sit idly by and wait for their demise. Oliver didn't want to agree to this proposal, but what if a miracle truly occurred? To avoid further complications, early the next morning, he had Estina sign the marriage certificate. That very afternoon, he invited the Baroness to witness and instruct Estina on how to continue the family line. It was said that the Grand Duke currently resembled a wolf. Hearing this, Estina thought, at least it's a pretty cool animal. If it were a giraffe, that would be ridiculous. That evening, as she entered the bridal chamber with a group of servants, she suddenly felt like she was being used as a tool again, just like in the past. The last time was in Wando, when that man, despite constantly saying he loved her, ultimately just took advantage of her. Everything was in the past. She sighed softly. Oliver, catching this, suddenly thought of the crazy idea of the vassals and shamefully apologized to Estina. But the girl didn't pay any mind, only resolutely walking forward. I finally get to see the groom. A growl from inside made the servants behind her tremble. When the door closed, life or death was no longer anyone else's concern. Estina lit a candle and saw a large iron cage inside the room. She had heard the rumors about Tyrios, with his shimmering silver hair and deep blue eyes. Thanks to his handsome appearance, he was the most sought-after bachelor in the Empire. Even she, who had little interest in social circles, had heard of him. They had built this cage to prevent him from harming others. It seemed the rumors were true. He was kind to those beneath him. Estina pulled the decorative sword from the wall and used the key to unlock the iron cage. Inside was a large beast with silvery white fur. Seeing someone approach, it growled, stood up, and immediately lunged at her. Estina nimbly dodged and then countered with a powerful blow. After a few exchanges, she realized that even with Tyrios' strength, her opponent was just a beast, its attacks monotonous and easy to predict and counter. It now seemed to be gathering its strength for a decisive blow, which was exactly what Estina wanted. After a heavy strike, the beast fell to the ground on all fours. Now that it's subdued, it's time for the main event. Estina spread its legs, awkwardly fumbling around, but still unable to find the crucial spot. She even made awkward eye contact with it. Seeing it fold its front paws, and its expression looking like it was crying, she blurted out, "Are you embarrassed?" But when she touched something soft on its tail, she was speechless. Outside the room, seeing that the girl had been inside for an hour, everyone began to prepare for the funeral rites. But suddenly, the door burst open, and the red-haired girl calmly walked out, carrying a furry leg in her hand. "There's a problem," she said. "Your Grand Duke is not functional." The sight of the woman leading her husband around on a dog leash stunned everyone. It turned out that on their wedding night, after dragging her monstrous husband out of the room, she discovered that the Grand Duke seemed to be impotent. Upon learning that they had even given him medicine to no avail, the girl could only shake her head in exasperation. "This is troublesome. The Grand Duke was so weak. If she killed him and claimed self-defense, no one would believe her. Moreover, the initial condition was to bear the Grand Duke's child, yet he was terrified of her. Left with no other choice but a plan for the long term, Estina instructed the butler to prepare a strong chain. A few days later, the servants of the Grand Duke's mansion witnessed a dreamlike scene. The once ferocious and brutal Grand Duke was now obediently being led on a walk by his wife on a leash. Whether human or beast, one must interact with society. Staying indoors constantly will diminish one's self-esteem, and perhaps that's the reason why you're not. When he suddenly snarled at the gardener, Estina tugged lightly on the leash, and oh. The Grand Duke immediately lowered his head and obediently followed his wife as they left. To learn basic training methods, the young woman searched through numerous books and came across one titled, "How a Good Citizen Tames a Wild Wolf." She felt the content was perfectly suited to her current situation, but the content inside was far from what she imagined. However, upon further reflection, what she and the Grand Duke needed to do was actually similar to the book, but first he needs training. Estina extended her hand. "Tyrios, raise your hand." He immediately snarled, swiping his claws downwards, but in the end he did extend his foreleg, which could be considered obeying the command. Although his attitude was terrible, this was only the first step, and she couldn't demand too much. "Tyrios, sit." Seeing no reaction, she figured this command was more difficult to understand than raising a hand, so she pressed down on his back. "Here, this is sitting." With the pressure, the still resisting Grand Duke plopped down onto the ground, his doggy face trembling pathetically. This kind of training could at least prevent him from harming others. Even if it couldn't cure his condition, it could at least help him integrate into society after she left. After all, he was the master deeply loved by his subordinates. But this peaceful scene was shattered by an intruder. Baron Vernon criticized her for disrespecting her husband. From the vague words that slipped out, Estina immediately deduced that this Baron was one of the masterminds behind this ridiculous wedding farce. The one who ordered Oliver to drug him was probably him as well. "I thought you only knew how to scheme from behind the scenes, but you finally showed your face, huh?" As she predicted, he was incredibly thick-skinned that a girl sold here to continue the lineage dares to put on airs as the Grand Duchess. Baron Vernon intended to teach her a lesson, but as soon as he opened his mouth, Estina interrupted him without a pause that "I am the Grand Duchess, and yet you treat me like a servant. This is utterly humiliating. So, can I interpret this disrespect as you harboring rebellious intentions against the Grand Duke's family? As she spoke, she stroked the chin of the dog beside her. Tyrios, what do you think? How could a dog have any thoughts? The psychological trauma from earlier hadn't yet faded. Tyrios let out a few howls, scaring the Baron back 100 meters. Listen to whatever your wife says, as long as she doesn't hit you with a sword, Tyrios thought to himself. But Baron Vernon still wasn't giving up, loudly proclaiming that he couldn't ignore this act of insulting the Grand Duke. Ridiculous. Before, who knows who locked the Grand Duke in a cage and drugged him? You should know your place and retreat. While you can. Still silenced, Baron Vernon left in a huff. Afterward, Estina learned that the Grand Duke's mansion was holding a meeting today, and attending the meeting was the Grand Duke's duty. Glancing at the man licking his claws beside her, she said coldly, "No right exists without a corresponding duty. I will reclaim what is mine." Having been a queen in her past life, Estina knew very well that if she didn't want things to spiral out of control, she had to deal with the problem in its infancy. She told Oliver to bring the Grand Duke's seal, then grabbed Tyrios' paw and pressed it firmly onto the document in front of her. The curious butler asked what it was. Estina replied, "It's Tyrios von Atlanta, during the valid period of our marriage, granting full authority to his wife, Estina von Atlanta." Having said that, she took a training sword and strapped it to Tyrios' back. "From now on, obey me, and I'll treat you a little more gently." Tyrios didn't understand what she was saying, but instinctively felt fear, only able to interpret it as, if I don't obey, she'll use this sword to take my dog life. To save his life, he could only tremble and follow behind his wife. Oliver thought to himself, if the vassals find out that someone is forging the seal, they certainly won't let it go. But he was even more curious to know what this woman was planning. At that moment, Baron Vernon was gathered with the vassals, bad-mouthing the Grand Duchess. When the doors of the hall burst open, the woman who had accompanied the Grand Duke entered, radiating an aura of authority. Everyone jumped up in fright at the sight of her. Estina calmly sat in the head seat and offered a greeting. Immediately afterward, she faced opposition from several people, and in response to their questioning, she promptly produced the authorization document. "Unless the Grand Duke himself objects, I will not accept anyone's opinion." Baron Vernon trembled with rage and roared, "There's no way a Grand Duke who's lost his mind would sign this himself." Estina turned to the butler. "This was signed by the Grand Duke himself, correct?" "Yes, that is correct," Oliver replied. "Tyrios." She gently stroked the dog's back. "Do you have any objections?" Remembering her earlier warning, Tyrios whimpered pathetically in fear, as if to yell, "I don't." The vassals were furious, but dared not speak, and the matter was settled. Estina then requested the butler to compile a report on the Grand Ducal family's assets and business situation and deliver it to her. "Since I have some free time, reading this will be a good way to pass the time." Faced with her undeniable presence and authority, Oliver silently thought, if Queen Martina were still alive, wouldn't it be just like this? "Tyrios," Estina called softly, then tossed him a piece of jerky. Tyrios caught it neatly. No one expected a Grand Duke to be so easily tamed. No one had ever dared to think of training the Grand Duke like an animal, and even if they had, no one would have dared to do it. The Grand Duke's behavior as a pet made everyone a little uncomfortable, but they also felt that perhaps this was the will of the heavens. After reviewing the asset report, Estina's face darkened. She hadn't realized that most of the vassals in the Atlanta family were so corrupt, blinded by greed. They were simply leeching off the vast wealth of the Grand Ducal family. With their master transformed into a monster, they showed even less restraint, brazenly transferring assets out of the family's control. To continue exploiting the situation, they even devised a scheme to find someone to bear an heir for the Grand Duke. Faced with such a vast network of corruption, Estina decided to uproot it entirely. The first target was Ontai, the junior baron with the least serious offenses. After a few threats, all those involved in the embezzlement were brought to light. They were mostly the heads of the household staff. This solidified Estina's authority within the Grand Duke's mansion like never before, but also put her in danger. That day, while playing with Tyrios in her office, she noticed something unusual about Alice, the tea server. She had anticipated this for a long time. To transfer assets, There definitely had to be an inside helper, and controlling a maid was too easy. After being exposed, Alice immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness, confessing that she was pregnant with Baron Vernon's child and that she had resorted to such measures because she was coerced. Estina didn't punish her immediately, but only confiscated the poison and told Alice to go outside and return later. She looked pensively out the window. The training is almost complete. This can be removed now. But as soon as she removed the training sword from her back, Tyrios trembled, whimpering as if he was about to cry. His small dog brain couldn't stop thinking, "I've been so obedient, am I about to be punished?" Suddenly embraced by Estina, the startled dog yelped in panic, and "Oh, more barking, here's a treat." Knowing he wasn't going to be punished, Tyrios immediately became much more docile. Not long after, Baron Vernon was brought in. Initially, he had forced himself on Alice, a girl who already had a fiancé, and then used that weakness to control her, forcing her to obey and betray the Grand Duke's family secrets. After being caught, he used the child in her womb to threaten her, forcing Alice to poison the Grand Duchess. However, despite the clear evidence, the Baron stubbornly denied the charges, insisting on his innocence. He even blamed Alice, claiming she abused her power and acted arrogantly. But Estina didn't care. The victim doesn't need to be bound by morality, and you have no right to plead innocence. Embezzlement and corruption weren't enough. You even dared to attempt to murder the Grand Duchess. Regarding the child in Alice's womb, the future upbringing costs will be directly deducted from Baron Vernon's confiscated assets as compensation for emotional distress. As the master, I take responsibility for not managing my own assets properly. With that, she immediately ordered him back to prison to be executed in 3 days. As for Alice, she was banished from the Grand Duke's territory. Previously, to survive under Wando, she had endured and accepted his condescending offer. But she never thought of herself as tainted, because in the end, she had successfully avenged her mother. Even so, Estina understood that not every woman could do what she did, so she didn't punish Alice too harshly. Not long after, the Atlanta territory entered the rainy season. Being cooped up inside every day, playing games was driving Tyrios crazy. The long-haired dog began rubbing against Estina incessantly, filling the room with the smell of dog fur. Oliver then brought in the inventory of Baron Vernon's confiscated assets and reported that the Baron's family was staging a sit-in protest at the mansion. They objected to the fact that even his legitimate children couldn't inherit the property, while a maid received a share. They claimed it was a conspiracy to seize the family's assets. Estina paid them no mind. Vernon's son was executed for plotting to murder the Grand Duchess, and now he has the audacity to demand the return of his assets. Tell them if they're still dissatisfied, I'll pursue all of Vernon's remaining uninvestigated crimes. If they want, I'll let them experience the special gift Baron Incite gave me. Oliver shuddered at that. It truly was a terrifying poison. The Grand Duchess is truly just and fair, rewarding affection and punishing without mercy. She shows no compassion to those who oppose her. And those foolish vassals, they didn't even realize that and brought about their own deaths. Just then, a maid came to announce, "We have guests." Estina arrived in the drawing room and was surprised to find 2 people waiting, Benjamin and Hyzen. Benjamin was an old classmate of Estina's from the academy. They became friends through their shared study of swordsmanship, often practicing together. After hearing that Estina was forced to marry the monstrous Grand Duke, Benjamin resolved to rescue her. On the way, he met Hyzen, the knight captain of Count Rudy. The two became friends after punishing some thugs in a tavern together and decided to travel together, sharing the goal of finding Estina. Benjamin had assumed that even if Estina were still alive, she would be living miserably, but it seemed she had adapted to this place completely. Hyzen, upon entering, immediately ran off to be sick. While waiting, Benjamin and Estina took the opportunity to chat. During their conversation, Estina expressed some concern for her husband. Initially, she only felt sorry for keeping Tyrios locked up, so she let him stay in the office. Unexpectedly, during the month he'd been there, she had gradually developed feelings for him, missing him whenever he was out of sight. It's clearly just a child's fear of being alone, she thought, her expression becoming more serious. But to Benjamin, her expression seemed to be hiding something she couldn't say. "Estina," he said seriously, "if you're being forced, I will definitely get you out of here." "Don't you understand yet?" she replied calmly. "How could a mere baron save me? If you just agree, I can do anything for you. Estina was momentarily flustered. Could he possibly like her? But she had lived another life and couldn't hurt. A friend over something uncertain. Like as a friend, the man pursed his lips. Right as a friend. Suddenly, a soft whimpering sound could be heard. Estina stood up, grateful for Benjamin's concern. To dispel his doubts, she decided to let him see the truth for himself. She pushed open the heavy door, and the growl of a beast immediately echoed out. Benjamin nervously swallowed. The monstrous Grand Duke was in there. Benjamin was stunned when he saw the monstrous Grand Duke with his own eyes. The one standing there, wagging his tail like a goofy dog, was the cursed Grand Duke. Say hello. This is Grand Duke Tyrios. I call him Terry. He's cute, isn't he? This was completely different from the rumors. Had Estina really married this monster? While petting the enormous dog, Estina asked Benjamin if he would like to temporarily defer his studies to help her manage the affairs of the territory. After purging the corrupt officials, I've discovered a severe shortage of manpower. It would be wonderful to have someone trustworthy like you lend a hand. But Benjamin hadn't come to discuss the territory's future. Though he knew it was impossible between them, he still hoped Estina could marry a good man and live a happy life, at least a human, not a beast. What if I refuse? He asked. Estina tilted her head, thought for a moment, then said, Tyrios, bite him. Benjamin nearly wet himself in fear, but seeing that the other party only silently looked at him, he breathed a sigh of relief. Estina tilted her head, thought for a moment, and said, Tyrios, bite him. Benjamin was so scared he almost wet his pants, but seeing that she just stared at him silently, he sighed in relief. Why would you joke like that? The next second, Tyrios let out a growl and lunged, pinning him to the sofa, snarling menacingly. Hyzen, having just finished vomiting, walked in to see the enormous beast pinning Benjamin down, baring its teeth threateningly. Without a word, he immediately drew his sword to help his friend. But Estina was quicker. She grabbed Tyrios' face and began sternly scolding him. Having witnessed the entire scene, Hyzen trembled, his legs turning to jelly. He just wanted the young lady to return home immediately. We shouldn't continue with this deal. But Estina thought, I've already accepted the money. I can't just quit halfway. I can go back on my word. Estina said, I plan to produce an heir for the Atlanta family and then divorce after a year. Her words left both Benjamin and Hyzen stunned. That possible. We'll have a try and see. Truthfully, she wasn't certain herself. Even if her soul was human, could she really conceive a child with him? But at this point, she had no other choice. Benjamin's mind was in turmoil. He just wanted to take Estina's hand and leave this place immediately. If she wanted to escape, he would do anything for her. But if he confessed his feelings now, he would definitely be rejected. So he just quietly, resolutely made a promise that if one day you want to return, no matter when, I will help you. I always want what's best for you. For some reason, Estina saw a glimpse of ACI in Benjamin, her loyal retainer from her past life, her right-hand man, the most trusted friend who had stayed by her side until the very end. At least, to her, he was even more precious than a lover, and so she was willing to trust Benjamin. Although she desperately wished he would stay and help her, she respected his decision to leave. A few days later, Estina took Hyzen to the renovation project of the mansion that once belonged to Baron Vernon. At that moment, Baron Vernon's father showed up to complain. Upon seeing her, he knelt down, weeping and wailing. Thinking that women were often soft-hearted, he believed the Grand Duchess wouldn't have the heart to refuse him. But Estina wasn't soft-hearted at all. She immediately exposed his act of poisoning his own son. The fact that I haven't prosecuted you doesn't mean I don't know anything. I simply wanted to let you destroy yourselves at the bottom of society. If you dare cause any more trouble, you won't even have that opportunity. Hearing this, the old man immediately dropped his pretense of misery and started yelling and cursing obscenely. Listening carefully to his curses, Estina suddenly realized that without some mysterious force at play, how could a human being transform into a beast? She immediately asked him if he knew anything, but the only response was a gob of spit straight into her eye. Unfazed by this suicidal act, she ordered him imprisoned. Having experienced much evil in her past life, this was nothing to her. But what truly bothered her was the curse, if it truly was a curse. There had to be a way to break it. Just then, Tyrios tilted his head and sniffed Estina then gently licked her cheek. Judging by his goofy expression, he seemed to be trying to comfort her. Astina didn't stop him, letting him continue to lick her cheek. "You've been getting cuter lately. None of your vassals are as sweet as you, their master," she said, bending down to kiss him on the lips. The night was quiet. Astina suddenly opened her eyes. She sensed someone behind her. Thinking it was an assassin, she immediately sat up and ripped the blanket back. She froze, staring at the naked man lying in her bed. This was how? There was no sign of forced entry, and the man was wearing a collar, Tyrios's collar. It couldn't be anyone else. Her heart pounded as she reached out a trembling hand and gently rolled the man over. In that moment, she felt as if struck by lightning. Theodore. In her past life, after she killed Wando with her own hands to avenge her mother, she had only longed for death. It was Theodore who gave her a reason to live. "I bestow upon you the name of your mother and your family. From now on, live for me." The memory was vivid. How could they be so alike? Could it be he was reborn too? The man slowly opened his eyes, still in a daze, but was immediately yanked forward. Before he could understand what was happening, the woman had pinned him to the bed. He gasped, demanding to know who she was, but she only stared at him, as if speaking to herself. "My Theodore, after waiting for so long, are you happy? Were you at peace leaving me behind?" Every day felt like hell. Tyrios was choked, unable to breathe, but Astina didn't loosen her grip, her agitation growing. "You made me kill you with my own hands. And now you have the audacity to come back to me? I lived my entire life for you, only for you. I curse you, you cruel and heartless man." When she finally released the chain around his neck, Tyrios gasped for air, but before he could recover, she kissed him fiercely. "But I still love you." The strange woman cried, confessing her love as she kissed him again, giving him no chance to react. This is my first kiss." Managing to sit up with difficulty, Tyrios struggled to ask, Who are you?" Faced with his urgent question, Astina suddenly stood up and ran away. Tyrios started to call after her, but then realized he was completely naked. He quickly grabbed a sheet and wrapped it around himself, searching for his clothes. Just then, Oliver rushed in. Upon seeing his master, the old butler burst into tears and rushed forward, relieved. Seeing the old butler's immediate and tearful reaction, Tyrios grew even more suspicious of the woman. She clearly wasn't an assassin, as Oliver didn't seem alarmed by her presence. But that kiss, what was that about? When he learned that she was his wife, the Grand Duchess, Tyrios was completely stunned. "That wasn't I told to prepare my will? I never thought someone would actually be arranged to be paired with a beast like me. How did she survive this long?" "The madam is quite extraordinary," Oliver replied, "more intelligent than anyone. She's—" Seeing this, Tyrios became even more confused. This was the first time he had seen the butler so respectful toward someone. Not long after, now properly dressed, Tyrios prepared to go to his office to see how much chaos had overtaken his territory during the year he was unconscious. But before he could reach his destination, he froze, completely dumbfounded. Within the mansion, his vassals were either imprisoned or executed. There were barely any survivors left worth summoning. What's this? Why does it smell like dog in here? Is someone keeping a dog in the mansion? The Grand Duke frowned. Before Oliver could answer, he casually picked up the fishing rod leaning against the wall. Who has the audacity? Then he noticed the inkwell on his desk had been changed, and simultaneously felt the wound on his neck. That IT was the Grand Duchess. Oliver said, sweating nervously. "Yes, about that dog. Actually, well, it happened while you were indisposed. Just tell her not to let the dog hair fly around." Soon, Tyrios had finished reviewing all the records. He couldn't believe that the vassals he had trusted so much would dare to steal so blatantly. Especially Baron Vernon, who not only embezzled funds, but also threatened the maids and plotted to murder the Grand Duchess, the one who knew the truth. Vernon was supposedly a man famous for loving his wife. Oliver, a man of experience, could only offer the helpless advice. Subordinates will never let their masters see their dark side. The one who smiles at you today could be robbing someone else tomorrow. This completely overturned Tyrios' perception. He had always been taught not to interfere in the private lives and personal affairs of his subordinates. Experiencing betrayal for the first time in his life made him extremely uncomfortable. But the punishments and compensations the Grand Duchess implemented for the mansion staff made him see her in a completely different light. Moreover, even the rice planting project and the territory's administration were managed perfectly by her, causing the Grand Duke to question his own existence. Had he just stumbled upon a treasure? Just a few hours later, news of the Grand Duke's return to human form spread throughout the mansion. The vassals immediately flocked to him, hoping to gain an advantage by being the first to explain themselves. But when Oliver entered the office with tea, he froze, stunned. He saw his master sitting there, happily chewing on dried meat. I asked at the Grand Duchess's snack. I've heard of women hiding cookies, but hiding dried meat is a first for me. Well, it's pretty good. Oliver broke out in a cold sweat. You haven't changed a bit, sir. He didn't have the courage to say. You were once led around the mansion on a leash and trained like a dog by the Grand Duchess. So he changed the subject. The vassals are gathered at the main gate, clamoring to see you. Upon hearing this, the dried meat in Tyrios's mouth suddenly lost its flavor. He didn't believe he could resolve everything smoothly without bloodshed. In truth, the Grand Duchess's punishments were reasonable enough, and there was no need for further intervention. But he still wanted to hear what excuses they would come up with. Before leaving, he instructed Oliver, "Please find the Grand Duchess for me. I haven't seen her since she ran out last night." Oliver recalled Estina's appearance last night. Her expression was indeed a little strange. Could it be that she was frightened after seeing the beast transform into a human? "I owe you one, Oliver." Tyrios said there's so much to thank her for. He had so much he wanted to know about her, and was even more curious about why he was able to transform back into a human. He had thought his final moments as a human had passed. The feeling of being trapped in a quagmire with no escape still frightened him. Not long after, Tyrios appeared at the door. The vassals were overjoyed to see him. They thought they finally had a chance to turn the tables. They even tried to shift all the blame onto the Grand Duchess. Unfortunately for them, Tyrios now saw their true colors and didn't give them any further opportunity. As he left that place, Tyrios felt a pang of pity for himself. Despite being born the heir of the Atlanta family, possessing wealth and title, he couldn't win people's hearts. All his efforts in human form seemed to have vanished like bubbles. He didn't even have the right to choose his own wife. Lost in thought, he suddenly saw Estina lying beneath a large tree, serene as a painting. It seems there really is a time difference between myself and the Grand Duchess. We have a lot to talk about. Speaking of which, he thought, the vassals just now said the Grand Duchess tamed me, and Oliver said my beast form resembled a wolf. Meaning, the dog fur all over the office, the dried meat in the drawer, and that dog Dot was me. Estina dreamt of Theodore again, hearing the loving words he once spoke. She felt only bitterness, knowing it was all a lie. She opened her eyes in anguish, tears blurring her vision. Sitting up abruptly, drenched in sweat, she gasped for breath. When she turned to look beside her, her gaze fell upon the person lying next to her, and her heart became flustered. Platinum blonde hair. Although she knew he wasn't Theodore, she always saw Theodore's shadow in Tyrios. "Why didn't you wake me up?" Tyrios coughed awkwardly, finding her behavior strange. She acted as if nothing had happened last night. After formally greeting each other again, Estina apologized for her emotional outburst earlier. Taking the opportunity, Tyrios curiously asked if she often had nightmares. But if it was just a dream, it was too unusual. The kiss last night, and the words she spoke in her sleep. Could it be that she had a lover back in her homeland? But Estina clearly didn't want to continue the topic. Her expression immediately returned to its usual calmness. Noticing this, Tyrios felt a pang of guilt. Perhaps she really was forced to leave her lover to come to him. Even though everything happened while he was out of control, ultimately, the fault lay with him. Afterward, the two bickered for a while over who would wear the cloak, and Tyrios eventually gave in. He suggested they walk back together in the cold wind. Watching Estina's quickly receding figure as she walked ahead, he couldn't help but sigh. Are all the noble ladies of the capital this strong? On their way back, Tyrios mentioned the vassals, making Estina think he was about to reprimand her for handling matters on her own. But unexpectedly, what she received was gratitude. I still can't believe that the people I trusted absolutely could do such cruel things. Estina said coldly, "You're the heir, so they're choosing the soft spot to squeeze. You should remember, human nature isn't only good. Don't be naive anymore. Nothing is more foolish than trusting someone completely." Tyrios looked at the younger girl in astonishment, speaking words not unlike Oliver's. Her words were as if she had seen right through his heart. When the two returned, Oliver immediately reproached him. "Why didn't you offer your coat to the Grand Duchess?" But unexpectedly, The couple's playful banter about the incident left him speechless with emotion. After Estina left, Tyrios sighed involuntarily. Madame is truly extraordinary. She not only tamed the monster, but also has a calm demeanor, a steady way of speaking, and a body full of inexplicable mysteries. Now, he didn't know how to face his wife. Thinking about the embarrassing things that had happened before, Oliver thought to himself, "There are some things you're better off not knowing, sir. Listen to your wife, and your family will be at peace. A cup of hot tea, sir. I just had some sent to the Grand Duchess's room as well." Facing Estina again, Tyrios still felt a little awkward, but seeing that she had changed clothes and seemed much more relaxed, he, despite Oliver's advice to obey his wife, still needed to maintain some pride. So he leaned back against the armrest of the sofa and joked, "Madam is quite stubborn, refusing my kindness even when it's so cold." Unexpectedly, she simply replied coldly, "Is that so?" and then told him, "Sit down first." Hearing this, Tyrios shuddered, his heart pounding. Why do I feel like I can't disobey? He sat down opposite her, awkwardly and amusingly mocking himself. Clearly, I've lived for years as a beast, and I'm still trying to act like a nobleman. After composing himself, he expressed his desire to hear the story of how she came to this place. Estina calmly explained that she had been sold due to debts, with the condition being to bear an heir for the Atlanta family. So, do you want to go back? Yes, I want to go back. Although he hoped she would say she wanted to stay, Tyrios respected her decision. He couldn't force her to live with someone who could turn into a monster at any moment. However, Estina then asked, "What about the poor beast?" Realizing that she was showing pity for him, Tyrios felt a surge of anger. He couldn't understand. She was also forced into this marriage because of debt. So on what basis was she pitying him? Because I have a fatal weakness. You want to mock even my good intentions? Tyrios grew wary as she approached. Don't cross the line. Even if you're my lifesaver, it doesn't mean I'll tolerate all your actions. Seeing his anger, Estina felt that this was more like a human being. Beg me, Grand Duke. If your people are truly important to you, then be selfish for once and beg me. Tyrios knew she was right. He also hoped he could be selfish for once. But it was too difficult for him. There were too many things to consider. But for someone like him now, what meaning did pride and face hold? Please help me, madam. Estina nodded slightly. Good, a decisive answer like that is what I needed. Tyrios was a little bewildered by how quickly things were progressing. I asked that all? Is there anything else you think needs to be done? This is strange, he thought to himself. She really is a very strange person, but strangely adorable. The tension in his chest dissipated, and he sank down beside her. But I can't give you love, nor can I give you a proper married life. Someone who isn't even fully human. Like me, how can I live like a normal husband? Unexpectedly, Estina suddenly leaned closer. That won't do. I absolutely must have marital rights. The initial condition was to produce an heir, so that's completely different from what I just agreed to help you with. Besides, now that Tyrios has returned to being human, there are no more obstacles. She began to undo the Grand Duke's buttons. Before, you were in your beastly form, so it wasn't possible. But now, what's stopping us? The 6-foot-tall Grand Duke Tyrios trembled like a young woman being forced into marriage. W, what are you doing? Producing an heir, of course. He quickly grabbed her hand as she continued unbuttoning his shirt. Wait a minute. You don't need to worry about children. Taking advantage of Estina's momentary confusion, he quickly tucked his shirt back into his pants. If I can't produce an heir, the Grand Duchy will be seized by the royal family. Tyrios assumed Estina's urgency stemmed from needing that security, but he still needed time to mentally prepare. Estina frowned. Isn't that something only couples in love worry about? We're just fulfilling our family obligations. Why overthink it? But then she remembered he was still young. She should be gentler with him. Unexpectedly, as she reached out again, Tyrios suddenly cried out in a helpless, flustered voice, "This is my first time." Estina immediately understood that, so it's your first time? Tyrios coughed awkwardly twice. Well, since it's my first time, something this important can't be taken lightly. Seeing his clumsy reaction, Estina was certain. He truly was inexperienced. Producing an heir for the Atlanta family was clearly his duty. So why did she suddenly feel like a lecherous wolf? Your Highness, we're husband and wife now. Since you've transformed back into a human, there's no reason to delay any longer. Are you really not concerned about losing your virginity like this? We're only doing this because of the marriage contract, so why bother with such things? Those are just childish thoughts. Her words jolted Tyrios. She's right. Who knows when I'll turn back into a monster? Again, As the head of the family, hesitating about consummating the marriage is indeed childish. Seeing his continued hesitation, Estina was about to give up when Tyrios spoke up, and "Oh, you're right, madam. I was wrong." He resolutely took off his shirt, but when he met her bare gaze, he felt incredibly embarrassed. Could you turn around? Estina complied without hesitation, raising her head to look out the bright window. It was supposed to be their first night, but it wasn't even evening yet. She called it a marriage of convenience. But in reality, this marriage had been won from the very beginning. A marriage of convenience. Normal couples didn't start like this. But what good did that do? It was just a momentary impulse, a fleeting illusion. Thinking this, Estina suddenly realized she was thinking of that young man again. Even though they looked exactly alike, this was quite rude. But quite a bit of time had passed, and it was strangely quiet behind her. Taking off clothes shouldn't take this long. Could he have run away? She quickly turned around and was tackled by a large dog. What the? Seriously? He just turned human for a little bit. To check if he still understood human speech, Estina told the dog, "Raise your paw." And he did, but this dog already knew how to do that. Oliver didn't seem surprised at all. He was old, and he had learned to accept everything. When the young master first transformed into a beast, he was nearly grieved to death every day. But no matter how painful it was, nothing could be changed. Only now, the fact that the duration of his human form was even shorter than they thought was the real problem. Estina began to regret not accepting his offer to go home. What did the Atlanta line ending have to do with her? She didn't have any feelings for this land. But looking at Terry's adorable, foolish face beside her, her heart softened, unsure if there would be a next time. Actually, her earlier suggestion was a test. If the Grand Duke had acted stiffly out of pride, she probably would have left without a second thought. But at least so far, he wasn't the kind of man with no redeeming qualities that she could turn her back on without a care. Next, Estina asked about the curse. Oliver didn't know exactly where it began, only that it started when the head of the Atlanta family was appointed Grand Duke, which was over 100 years ago. The first head of the family was granted the title for his contributions. In the war, the number of souls who died at his hands, countless. But in the end, the resentment didn't seek out the one who caused the war, but fell upon his descendants. Could this reincarnation be to atone for past sins? As night fell, looking at Tyrios whimpering in his puppy form, Estina felt a little awkward. Now that she knew his true form, she felt a bit shy about sharing a bed. But the puppy kept putting on such a pitiful act that she couldn't refuse him. All right, not knowing when he'd transform again, she might as well sleep with him. Anyway, all she had to do was touch him to know if he still had fur. He blushed so easily when he was human. So why did he keep wanting to jump into her arms as a dog? Could it be that this wife wasn't his type? It was also possible that him not remembering anything was a good thing. After a goodnight kiss, one person and one dog drifted off to sleep. But in the middle of the night, Estina's eyes suddenly flew open. What was this naked feeling under her hand? Wait, had he turned back into a human again? What should I do if my husband keeps turning into a dog? Don't worry, just kiss him. Tyrios, after transforming back into a human, was clearly agitated. When Estina mentioned the transformation time, he suddenly came to his senses and hurriedly asked when he had returned to his human form yesterday. Upon learning it was the same time as today, he began to speculate that there might be a pattern. Perhaps tomorrow, no, perhaps from now on, he would be able to transform back into a human. But for nearly a year living as a wolf, this has never happened. The only thing that's changed is that this woman has become my wife. He asked, "Madam, have you done anything unusual lately?" Estina also began to think. As usual, she walked the dog, gave him snacks, petted him a few times. And also kissed him. Hearing this, Tyrios broke out in a cold sweat. Just how much had the Grand Duchess kissed him? Estina calmly explained, "It was just the kind of kiss you give a pet to show affection. If I had known this would work yesterday, I wouldn't have been so worried." Tyrios coughed lightly. "It's just that I was so surprised. I was a little startled." Estina couldn't be certain. The family curse was indeed somewhat like a fairy tale, where the curse is broken when the two main characters fall in love. But that kiss didn't even count as a real kiss, just a slight touch of lips. Looking at the man's profile, Estina suddenly murmured, "Grand Duke, you're beautiful." Hearing this, Tyrios silently broke out in another half a drop of sweat. If the word beautiful were to be used to describe someone, it should be you. In terms of beauty, others might be comparable, but in terms of presence, you are unique. Your eyes are deep and captivating, making it hard to forget. "Madam, You truly are a rare beauty. Seeing Estina's indifferent expression, Tyrios thought she didn't like being complimented. But unexpectedly, she said, "After all, when you're dead, you're just a rotting corpse." A reply that left him speechless, not knowing how to respond. If the hypothesis was correct, another kiss might help verify it. Today was certainly going to be a long day. When Oliver saw the young master transform back into a human, tears immediately streamed down his face like a waterfall. He exclaimed again, "This madam is truly an extraordinary woman, to the point of giving up the chance to go home as easily as flipping her hand. She is truly a person of deep affection." Tyrios completely agreed. His wife was indeed an unpredictable woman. On the surface, she appeared indifferent to everything, but secretly stayed in the library to search for clues about the curse. She looked like someone without ambition, yet she was fluent in ancient languages that few knew. Compared to a student, she was more like a true professor. While Tyrios was lost in thought, Estina suddenly asked, "If the curse is broken, what do you plan to do?" I suppose I'll just go back to my old life," Tyrios replied. Estina didn't need to guess what that meant. Going to work on time every day, dealing with boring paperwork, a tedious life. She suggested he find something he truly enjoyed, like a hobby or a pet. "Just try different things. You're bound to find something that makes you happy," she said. Tyrios considered this seriously, then looked up at her and asked, "What about a person?" At that moment, Estina's expression flickered, but she quickly regained her composure and replied calmly, "That's not bad either." However, her reaction made Tyrios suspicious. I really resemble that person that much. Although he hadn't had time to listen carefully before, if he hadn't misheard, just hearing her call the name Theodo again would probably make everything clear. So he used the excuse of discussing nicknames, but Estina firmly refused. This saddened him. Someone who had rummaged through books to find a way to break his curse was now treating him coldly just because of a nickname. Could it be that only that man was allowed to call her that? The thought sparked a feeling of resentment within him. "Tina," he said, "that name sounds lovely." The name, seemingly lost to the past, made Estina momentarily lose herself in thought. She reminded herself that this man was not Theodo. Although their appearances were eerily similar, their personalities were completely different. Yet, why did she keep seeing Theodo's shadow in him? "Theodo," she blurted out. Tyrios paused for a moment, then said he wouldn't mind at all if she called him that. But Estina couldn't bring herself to do it. Such nicknames should be reserved for someone truly important. But for Tyrios in this life, there were only two people he had ever felt deeply about. His nanny, who had retired and returned to her hometown, and Oliver, who would surely be terrified if he dared to use a nickname with him. If a wife isn't important to her husband, he asked, then who is? Estina seemed surprised by his words. Finally, she concluded, the Grand Duke is a lonely man. He chuckled. Coincidentally, I think the same of my wife. Tyrios glanced at his watch, then said seriously, "Madam, if I haven't transformed back by midnight, please kiss me. Then we'll know the answer." Estina reluctantly agreed. She hadn't expected even a request for a kiss to sound so stiff and emotionless coming from him. But she also understood his current anxiety. He must be terrified of turning back into a beast. She hesitantly took his slightly trembling hands, wanting to offer some comfort. However, a naive Grand Duke like him, who had never had a woman take his hand, so why? His heart beat faster than when he was cursed. "Oh, you need me to get you a glass of warm milk?" Tyrios stammered, "Madam, I'm not a 3-year-old. He was a bit speechless. He thought Estina had suddenly become tender, but it turned out she was treating him like a child. But to someone who had lived a life like Estina's, 26 was still very young. This hurt Tyrios even more. He frowned and asked the butler, "Do I look that much like a child?" Could it be that because their wedding night hadn't gone as planned, Estina thought he was young? The more he thought about it, the more upset he became, and he lost all focus on his work. So he decided to go for a walk to clear his head. To prevent any risks, Oliver reminded him that he absolutely had to go with the Grand Duchess. Tyrios didn't understand. What difference does it make? He didn't know that in the eyes of others, he was a ferocious monster, only becoming a docile puppy when he was with his wife. But seeing the butler's serious expression, he didn't argue further. deciding to find Estina himself when he learned she was in the courtyard. Before he left, Oliver handed him a box, saying it was from the Grand Duchess. Tyrios snatched it and took it with him, only to find a dog leash inside. Amused, he tried it on. Thinking about how guilty Oliver must be feeling at that moment, he couldn't help but laugh. Suddenly, he became curious about how he had lived with her when he was in his wolf form. Not long after, Estina hurried to the garden. She had clearly timed it to arrive at the Duke's office. Yet she was still late. What if Tyrios suddenly transformed into a wolf and caused trouble while she was away? She hadn't finished that thought when she saw him lying obediently on the ground, chained up with a dog leash, sleeping soundly. Even the next morning, Tyrios showed no signs of turning back into a human. To test their theory, Estina gently lifted his dog-like face, and just as she was about to kiss him, the large dog pounced on her, knocking her down. The large dog licked her face repeatedly with its long, wet tongue, forcing her to close her eyes against the slobbery sensation. When the movement stopped, she opened her eyes to find a naked Tyrios, blushing furiously. Estina appeared much calmer, simply saying, "It seems it's true. A kiss is required." Tyrios quickly looked around, finally grabbing a pillow to cover himself, then took the blanket from Estina and draped it over himself. "Next time, could you please not put me in such an embarrassing situation?" "All right." Estina nodded in agreement, but Tyrios was still flustered. How could he avoid being embarrassed next time? Could he dress the wolf in clothes? Besides, Madame's clothes are a bit much. Estina looked down at herself. "I'm not dressed indecently." Could it be because of this scene that, thinking about the spring-like scene just now, she sighed inwardly? Youth is truly wonderful. Your Highness, for a young man, such a reaction is perfectly normal. There's no need to be embarrassed. But these words, instead of helping, only made Tyrios tremble with embarrassment. Finally, he puffed out his cheeks and stood up, leaving without a word, leaving the clueless woman behind. By breakfast, Tyrios still hadn't recovered. The feeling of his tongue against his wife's skin was unforgettable. Even though he was the one naked, shouldn't she be the one embarrassed? So he blurted out, "Madam, are you shameless?" Hearing that question, and then receiving comfort from his wife, he felt even more cornered. "Actually, last time, you also seemed quite unrestrained." Realizing he was referring to their wedding night, Estina felt a pang of regret. "I was too hasty that night. If this method worked on anyone else, I wouldn't have pressured you to have an heir." With Tyrios' true appearance, he could easily find a better wife. Thinking of this, she asked, "Speaking of which, you haven't mentioned that marriage proposal again. Do you want me to repeat myself?" Watching Tyrios stammer, unable to speak, Estina seemed quite amused. But her joy was short-lived. A guard rushed in to report that the family retainers were gathered outside, protesting and demanding to see the Grand Duchess. Upon receiving the urgent news, the two decided to go out together. Tyrios believed that the most important thing of the moment was to establish the Grand Duchess's authority, in case he couldn't appear himself in the future. This action was clearly a display of favoritism from the Grand Duke. Estina glanced at the handsome, elegant man beside her and thought to herself, "No wonder he's famous in social circles." She'd heard that among the noble ladies, he was even called the Ice Knight. Only, they probably couldn't imagine this knight could be so easily embarrassed. Approaching the gate, where the crowd was clamoring, Tyrios quickly spoke up, "We never said we would forgive them." At this moment, he felt utterly humiliated and just wanted to punish them immediately. So, with an imposing air, he roared, "Silence. What's all this noise?" The retainers were momentarily pleased to see the Grand Duke appear, but upon seeing the Grand Duchess beside him, their enthusiasm immediately died down, and they hastily bowed their heads in feigned subservience. However, Tyrios paid no attention to their pretense. They then turned their attacks on Estina. Fortunately, Estina had prepared beforehand for anyone who had slandered her. She remembered every offense they had committed and recounted them in detail, leaving them speechless and unable to refute her. This made Tyrios admire Estina even more, and his anger towards the retainers reached its peak. He immediately ordered the knights to arrest them all. Sun, sweating profusely, thought to herself, "It's over. Before being sentenced, I'm going to die at the hands of the loan sharks." It's all that woman's fault, a breeding tool who sold herself to pay off debts, and now she dares to strut beside the Grand Duke. That vicious woman, she should die. A stone flew straight towards Estina. In that critical moment, Tyrios immediately shielded her, and ordered the stone thrower arrested. The man hastily knelt down and begged for mercy, still slandering Estina as a witch. This only enraged Tyrios further. It's thanks to her that I could become human again, and you, blinded by hatred, dare to insult her in front of me. Under her husband's protection, Estina thanked him, but she also made it clear that she wanted to repay all the humiliation she had suffered with her own hands. She took Tyrios' sword and walked straight towards a man who had insulted her. Let's gamble with my life and yours. Guess whether the Grand Duke's sword is single-edged or double-edged. If you guess correctly, I'll spare you. Sin was sweating profusely. She even knew about her gambling, but he was just an administrative official. How could he know what the Duke's sword was like? Just as Estina was about to draw the sword, he no longer had time to consider the gamble it is then. I guess it's single-edged. Then let's see. Estina raised the sword, brandishing it as if preparing to check both edges. To verify, Sin was so terrified that she panicked, and even Tyrios couldn't help but shudder, until the blade stopped firmly against Sin's neck. The man nearly fainted from fear. Estina slowly opened her mouth. Gambling only has one outcome. I'll crush you. Estina's cold declaration shook everyone present. This was the true authority of the Grand Duchess. But the most shaken person was Tyrios. He thought to himself, no wonder she could subdue me even when I was a monster. I didn't realize Estina's swordsmanship was this exceptional. But why is my heart racing like this? I'm a seasoned knight. How can I be afraid of a sword? Could this be a symptom of love? I've never liked anyone before. If I love her, I should want to see her more, right? But why do I just want to go home and calm down? And then, for the first time in his life, the naive Grand Duke decided to confess, but was immediately rejected. Estina told him not to speak nonsense. It was just an illusion. Those words dealt a heavy blow to Tyrios' pride. Even though I've never been in love, I can still tell if I like someone. But the fact is, you're mistaken. Ever since he first saw Estina wielding a sword, Tyrios' little heart had been pounding. He thought it was love, so to confirm, he stopped Hyzen and declared he would personally deliver the sword to Estina. But as soon as he saw her draw the sword, his heart pounded like the first time. Estina thought he probably still remembered the training he received as a wolf, and she felt a little remorseful for being too strict. But in Tyrios' eyes, this was love. That conclusion stunned Estina. She hadn't realized the Grand Duke was this naive. She couldn't take advantage of his confused feelings, so she gently advised him to calm down. It's just an illusion, not love. But to Tyrios, that explanation was no different than saying, you're not allowed to like me. How could he accept that? Unwilling to give up, he stepped forward and questioned, why are you so sure? Don't you want a place in my heart? No, Estina replied calmly to, I don't want that to happen. You're mistaken. Go back. Seeing her turn to leave, Tyrios still wouldn't give up. He blurted out, was it the gift from the capital that reminded you of your past love? Benjamin is just a friend. Estina said, I remember the first time we met, you called out another man's name. So what did you hear after all? Estina didn't expect that the two men not only looked alike, but even their annoying tone was strangely similar. The man stepped closer, repeating the words he had spoken that night. Even so, I still love you. Estina couldn't stand it anymore, and raised her sword, pointing it directly at Tyrios. Seeing him instinctively recoil, she suddenly threw the sword to the side. Tyrios was completely stunned. His eyes glanced silently at the Duchess, only to find his heartbeat had returned to normal. Estina asked coldly, mistaking fear for love, how is that, Your Grace? Please return to your office and calm down. Watching her leave, Tyrios finally understood. The fluttering feeling he'd experienced was just an illusion. This was the second time Estina had shown such intense emotion. Both times, it was related to the man from her past. He shouldn't have let his meaningless pride get the better of him and say those things. He picked up the sword, thinking, I should return this to her and apologize. But a feeling of resentment lingered in his heart. Even until the next morning, Tyrios couldn't find the right opportunity to apologize. He went to the training grounds again, and despite his awkwardness, mustered the courage to bow his head and apologize, and offered her the sword. Estina didn't stand on ceremony and apologize for troubling him with her personal matters. However, her obvious coldness weighed heavily on Tyrios' heart. Could it be that she was planning to leave? If your grace has recovered, there's no need for me to stay any longer. I originally planned to stay for only a year. Although he had prepared himself, hearing those words still caused a sharp pang in his chest. So, when you didn't specify a time frame before, was it out of pity for this pitiful beast? Estina replied softly, I had planned to return home after the child is born. But if your grace intends to remarry, I fear the child would become an obstacle. A profound sense of loss washed over Tyrios. So, she had never intended to stay. Before either of them could say anything more, a voice interrupted their conversation. Turning around, they were surprised to see who had arrived. Ather, it's been a long time. I never expected to see you again as a married man.